Wow, thank you very much. Thanks, Derek, and thanks to everybody for, as Derek said, turning out on this soft, gentle autumnal day. Welcome to this event and this conversation with two really exciting writers. I'm going to hold them up because they've both got beautiful covers as well. I have loved reading these books, right? They are total page turners, and it's wonderful to get both of the authors here talking with us today. So let me introduce them. So on my far left, Sophie Mackintosh is the author of 3 novels, The Water Cure, Blue Ticket, and Cursed Bread. Her debut novel was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize in 2018, and Cursed Bread, which we're going to talk about today, was longlisted for the Women's Prize in 2023. She was named on the highly prestigious 2023 Granta Best of Young British Novelists list. Sinéad Gleeson in the centre. Sinéad Gleeson's essay collection, Constellations, Reflections from Life, won Non-Fiction Book of the Year at the Irish Book Awards and the Dalkey Literary Award for Emerging Writer. It was shortlisted for the Rathbones Folio Prize, the James Tate Black Memorial Prize, and the Michel Déon Prize, and has been translated into several languages. She is the editor of 4 anthologies, including The Art of the Glimpse and the award-winning The Long Gaze Back, an anthology of Irish women writers, and the Glass Shore short stories. Sinead has engaged in multidisciplinary collaborations with artists and musicians, including commissions from the Wellcome Collection, the RHA Gallery, BBC Rua Red Gallery, and Frieze. She is co-editor with Kim Gordon of a brilliant collection called This Woman's Work, Essays on Music. I love that book. And her debut novel, which we'll be talking about today, is Hagstone, which was published earlier this year by Fourth Estate. So welcome, Sophie and Sinead, and thanks so much for being here today. I think this is going to be a really exciting conversation because while your novels are both very different from each other, they also have this kind of core to them, and they share this interest and intimacy with women's lives and with the kind of central female characters who populate them. And as I said earlier, they're also both total page turners. So Sophie, I'm going to ask you first. Cursed Bread is your 3rd novel, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about where it came from for you. Where did the story just emerge from?
So with this one, it was my first novel that was based on a true story. Like my previous 2 were kind of more speculative, and so existing in a world, I guess, outside of like the usual world. So I kind of thought it would be, in a way, easier because I was like, well, the story's kind of already written. And I remember coming across the story a long time before, and it just really had a hold on me. A story about a town shortly after the Second World War where there was a mass hallucination event and they never really knew what caused it. And it was just something so fascinating about that one event. It just really, I kind of stayed in my mind. And over the years, I returned to it again and again. And there's not really much kind of written about it, to be honest. And there's quite a few outlandish conspiracy theories, which were very interesting to read as well. And the more I kind of kept returning to it and thinking about it, I guess I used it as a springboard to create the story of Cursed Bread and to focus on, the wife of the baker, and to not do like a retelling of the story, but to make it something new and to kind of run with the conspiracy theories a little as well.
That's a really interesting take on historical fiction, to make it new as well and not just tell the story that has already been told before. But I love that idea that it took years of it kind of running in the back of your mind for it to turn into the Cursed Bread.
Yeah, I want to make like some kind of sourdough fermenting pun. But I think as well, like there was the question as well with the historical event. It was a tragedy, and because there wasn't that much written about it factually, I didn't felt I could do it justice as an actual retelling. I would have had to do like a lot more research, and in the end, I was like, I just wanted to kind of take elements from it and almost kind of. In the end, it's barely even about the event at all. It kind of becomes something new, really.
Yeah. Could you give us an idea of what it sounds like and do some reading for us?
Yeah, I'm going to read a little from the beginning. It's narrated by the wife of the baker, who kind of develops a relationship with some newcomers to the town. So she's going to reflect. This is right from the start. Sorry. When I recall the first time I met Violet, it embarrasses me. I hold the memories up to the light and think, Did it really happen like this? And even if it did, why not tell it differently, more generously? Why don't I pretend, even to myself? There's nobody left to know, nobody who could catch me out. I could say that she came in and took my hands in hers and looked into my eyes and said she always wanted a friend, a true friend, that she could see we were alike, with twin ravaging hearts under our ribs. My dour blouse could not conceal that from her. I could say that she picked me out of everyone in the town, was drawn along the sun-bleached stone of the pavements by hunger, by instinct, to where I had always stood, waiting. I could say a lot of things, but perhaps it's best to be honest now. I didn't sense her walking towards me on that chill morning in early spring, didn't notice her opening the door to the bakery. Her hair was dark and loose, spilling over her stiff white blouse and the lace at its collar. She hung behind the other customers, looking at the loaves stacked behind me one by one as if making an important decision. The other women in the shop greeted her. "Welcome," they said. "We've been expecting you." She smiled at that, and I had to stop myself from brushing my hand against hers when I passed her the loaf she finally chose. But I couldn't say much to her. I was afraid of her. She thanked me and left, and through the window I saw her pause and open the paper bag for a second, as if she was considering tearing into the bread like a dog. But she didn't. She closed the bag and then was gone. I stared after her until the next customer, I don't remember who, interrupted me, impatient for their breakfast. "You've seen a ghost," they joked, snapping their fingers.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. And I love that idea of the way you play with memory, right from the start. There's no one who could contradict me. And that we always have that kind of sense of the slipperiness, right, of the storytelling right from the start. So thank you. Sinead, you have a really established career as both, in so many fields, right, as a journalist, but as an editor and also as a non-fiction writer with Constellations. And I think it's really fascinating when somebody shifts genre. And Hagstone is your debut novel. So what was it about this story that drew you into fiction?
I kind of want to ask you the same question, because you did the same thing with going from essays to fiction. Sorry, can you hear me?
No.
Is it there?
There you go. It's in fact, people, the chronology of books is really interesting because people assume that Hagstone came after Constellations, but it didn't at all. It started a long, long time ago. And I think because a novel is a very big engine, I didn't have that, I was always working, I had young children, I was doing the anthologies, lots of things got in the way. So I started it a really, really long time ago and never could find the focus. You have to get big runs at novels, whereas essays are really handy. They're 10, 12 pages. If one isn't working out, you just skip off and work on another one and cheat on your own essays. But I couldn't ever, it's very hard to hold a novel in your head. So I just never got a run at it. But the central character, I think, was the reason I did go back and finish it, because I really wanted to know what would happen to her and what would where she'd end up. But yeah, I also feel, I might be in a minority, but I do think fiction and non-fiction they're sort of left and right brains. I don't think they come from the same place at all, and maybe other writers would disagree, but I do feel there are different things required of you in both, technically, but also they don't feel, one is something you sort of know and you assert, and the other thing, like fiction, is an active imagination. So they do feel very, very separate, very different but separate, yeah.
Yeah, and that works so beautifully with Hagstone, right? Because of some of the features of your novel are that other side of the brain, right? Yeah. They are the unknown, right? So like a key, I remember, I think I bumped into you in a park in Dublin, and I was like, what is the sound, Sinead? Because right from the start, there's the sound, and you never explain it, and I'd love to hear you talk about the sound.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me about the sound, but the sound is one of the first parts of the book. So the book was the character's Nell, she's an artist, and she makes very specific kind of art. She makes performance art, durational art, art using her body and the land art. So I always had Nell. She was always an artist. It was always set on an island, and there was always a sound. And the sound was very much the start of it. I did so much. You've probably heard of this various places in the world where there's a hum. There's a specific kind of sound that only some people can hear. There's a case of it in Kerry, and I remember driving myself mad going around Kerry trying to find this sound. But there's loads of examples of it all over the world. And again, I'm interested in the same way that the idea of ghosts, some people see them, some people can't, whatever. I was interested in why that sound was happening. And I didn't want to explain it because the book, again unintentionally, your books turn out the way you can plan what you think you're going to write about it, and your brain has another idea. And I think I thought the sound was going to be more central to it, and as I wrote my way in, it wasn't necessarily that. But again, these sort of folkloric elements, because it's set in an island and it's a kind of lonely, remote place, and it made sense that it would come into it. And I think also you have to trust. I don't think you have to treat the reader with respect. I don't think readers need everything spelled out for them. I think you have to let them make up their own minds about things. And so I felt I'm not even sure what the sound is. I have lots of theories, but I like that mystery in writing, that even you as the writer don't necessarily have all of the answers, or you can have a different answer on a different day of the week, you know.
Yeah, and I think that chimes really well, Sophie, with what you were saying about they never found an answer, right, to what was happening in the village. Okay, Sinead, will you take us to the island? Will you give us a little bit of a read?
I'm going to read a bit about. So another thing about Nell is that she's a bit of a pervert. She's a voyeur, and she's gotten into trouble for kind of peeping in people's windows. And in this section, this is a section about islands are great places. They're small and contained, and community is brilliant. But people can know your business too. So she gets involved with a man called Cleary, who is an islander, but he's been away for a long time. And he's just come back. So this is a night where she's basically looking in his window. In a remote place, desire is complicated. Everyone in their 20s from here to New York just wants to drink, party, fuck. Nell, a decade on, sees this part of her life is heading for the rearview mirror. Memories of parties in the island's forest that went on all weekend. A rollover of pills and lighting cigarettes the wrong way round. Dancing for 6 hours, feeling the bass jump in her body. A steady stream of hungry men, grappling against silver-coated trees, the rising sun glinting through branches as she lay under someone. The flip side, for others, meant that a small pool of people led to unreciprocated lust and frustration. That night, outside Cleary's, she wonders which of the local women he's been with, who was his first, how many. She's been with a lot of island men. On the beach, in damp bedrooms, their lives don't interest her, their hopes or habits, things they want. But each has told her things. Who owed money, who liked booze too much, which women wouldn't allow their husbands to touch them. She feels pity, disdain too, that they can't find a way out of that lack of connection. And every time she's on top of someone or men have leaned in, climbing her body like a cliff, she feels a pang for their unfuckedness. Cleary's curtains are open, or maybe there aren't any, given the perfunctory state of the dwelling, all the heat from the stove lost through the glass. He's burning through logs at some rate, the idiot. On the table are coloured gel filters, the kind some local lads use on lamps when hunting hares. This presents a possible unexpected conversation opener about a new piece. Hey, I've been gulping in your window, unbeknownst to you, but could I have some of those gel filters for an art project in the lighthouse? Thank you. Each night, something new about him reveals itself. The accelerated blink rate, as if trying to understand something cryptic. The angle of his nose, Roman, aquiline. His stubble, a scouring of black points on his chin. Eyes closed, she imagines it brushing her lips, her face, her thighs, an image of teenage hunger and beard rash, a petroleum scald in the groin. Cleary opens a beer, a kitog, left-handed, something they used to try and beat out of the kids in the local school. The room is sparse, a boxy television, a shelf with a handful of what look like manuals or maps. By the fire, underwear and a woolen jumper cling to a lopsided clothes horse. She experiences a sudden and inexplicable sadness, not for him or about him, but for herself, that despite the accumulation of years, life isn't where it could be. The fact that she always feels the right answer is just out of reach. The moon flickers behind the clouds, a silver plate looming. Would he be disgusted or turned on by this lurking? He might even be impressed at the discipline, the commitment. Distracted, she steps back, sensing the misstep too late, connecting with the recycled empties by the back door, the sound a klaxon. Shit. He turns quickly, alert, listening. By the time he's up out of the chair, Nell is gone. Years from now, she imagines herself visiting an expensive therapist in a city far from here, sitting in an elegant red brick house on a tree-lined street. Did you think deep down that you wanted to be caught? Of course not, she'd reply. I didn't want him to think I was a fucking degenerate. Well, maybe just a bit.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you. I mean, this sets this conversation between the books up beautifully, right? Because right from the moment that Violet walks into the bakery as well, there's this huge amount of voyeurism between Elodie, the baker's wife, and Violet and her husband or partner, the ambassador. And then here we have Nell just literally standing outside Cleary's house at night, looking in the window at him. And it's kind of brilliant because it connects to the way that as readers we're voyeurs, right? We're looking for the experience to access to the experience that we wouldn't have in real life, that kind of intimacy that books can give us. But it also really sets up both novels as, investigations into those kinds of passions and really considerations of the erotic passion and the kind of the longing for connection, but also just the longing for, you're talking about lust and fuckedness and stuff, right? Yeah. Just wanting that physicality and that physical connection. And I don't really have a question coming out of this. I suppose I'd love to hear you talk about how you thought that, how you think that inflects your novels and where that came from. Was it, how you feel about that?
I'm so glad you actually read that bit because that was like one of my favourite parts of Hagstone, and I think, that idea of the reader as voyeur, and I just think there's always something interesting. So it's so interesting about what you can glean and can't glean from, the glimpses, and the glimpses are so integral in Cursed Bread, and I think as well, to that kind of, that very specific experience of that kind of voyeuristic desire, because when you don't see the whole picture, you can make up the gaps, you can fill in the gaps, and you can, I guess, project things. And so much of the desire in Cursed Bread is very much not even about the other couple, but about Elodie herself, like filling this kind of very primal, very physical loneliness and desire. And like when I was writing the book, I just was imagining this this kind of this desire and this, I guess, this craving for intimacy as something, so hot and so different kinds of hot, but like it was like very heated and like thick and almost like blood or something, very visceral. This sense of desire. And so I think that kind of really physical element for me was something that I wanted to kind of get through.
Yeah, when it comes through, it really does with an impact to it. Sinead?
Yeah, I mean, so Nell is an artist, and she'd been famous when she was younger, and then got very disillusioned with the art world, which can be very, cutting and hard to make it, and also obsessed with youth and newness and who's the next big thing. So she sort of rejected that, and I think she isn't married, doesn't want to get married, doesn't want to have children, and has decided that because she's so focused on her own art and process that she's like, if I end up, being with someone, I have to look after them or I have to care for children, because I don't want anything to get in the way of me making my work. And I think the way she is, I mean, this voyeuristic part of her, and the fact that she doesn't want relationships is also something to do with keeping her powder dry, like literally not getting involved with anybody, so there aren't any kind of distractions. There's a scene in the book where she's in the bathroom of the local pub, one cubicle for women, avocado sink, the one, and the window's open and the smoking section's outside, and she hears some of the island men discussing her and discussing her body, and one of them says she's not wife material, and Nell goes, thank fuck, she doesn't want to be that. And I think that, but I also wanted to, there's a lot of writing about relationships, and there's a lot of passivity around female desire and eroticism, and I wanted to write somebody who just knew what she wanted and just went to all sorts of lengths to get it. So I just kind of wanted to write somebody like that, because I don't think we see enough of those women in books, to be honest. So I thought, I'll try and write someone like that.
Yeah, and I think that is part of the excitement, right? Yeah. Of like, there's the kind of basic, will they, won't they, between her and Cleary, and then also, okay, well, where will that go then, and that sense of her agency, I think, is really strong throughout. Yeah. And one of the things that strikes me as well about Hagstone is that the longing is there that is romantic, but there's also then the longing for a different kind of connection, and that's what she experiences at Rathglass with the Ineans. Yeah. So could you tell us a bit about that community?
Yeah, and again, it's funny, so there's a group of women who live on this island called the Ineans, which is the Irish word for the daughters, and they live in an abandoned kind of convent, and they come from all over the world, and they've just decided, right, the world is a terrible place, it's a bin fire, we're rejecting patriarchy and capitalism, and we're going to go and live this self-sufficient sort of idyll. And they commission a piece of work from Nell, and she's a lot of this book is about precarity, about being broke, and the things you have to do to just be an artist or be a writer. And she's very hand to mouth, often hungry. And she takes this commission, one, because she needs the money, but also she's really curious about these women, and sort of feels like, oh God, how are they like living in a world without men and stuck out there? And then, also realizes that maybe that's not the kind of, it's her life is not unlike theirs in many ways. But I think longing is a very central part of the book, and I think lots of this book is about how do you live the life that you want to lead, and whether that's you want to walk the Camino or you want to manage a football team or whatever it is. And Nell has just been very strict about, and maybe she has lost some elements of some parts of life because she wants to live this very specific kind of one. But the thing about books is the innings were not in the book from the start. They were quite a late arrival, and it was literally, I was hanging out the school uniforms, I think, on the line one very squally day like this, and all of a sudden this image appeared in my head of this group of women standing in the sea singing, and they all had their arms linked, and I just thought, who the hell are they?
Yeah.
And ran back in, and they showed up. Like I didn't think I was going to write about them, and that's the thing about books. You can tell yourself you're going this way, and then your brain goes, we're actually going over here, and you have to just give in to that sometimes. I was like, oh no, that means more characters. I'm going to have to do more work, but what can you do?
That's fascinating. It reminds me of, there's a story by the poet Deborah Stone who talks about a poem, seeing a poem coming over the field towards her, and just having to run as fast as she could to catch it, to get to the desk before it left. Yeah. And exactly that sense of like, we don't choose the stories that we write often. No. Yeah. And that, I love your description of, that it's about choosing the way that we want to live our lives. Yeah. And that strikes me as chiming, Sophie, with Elodie as well. I'm not spoiling the plot when I say that we have a kind of present day frame, and a lot of the novel is in flashback. But in the present day and in flashback, we're seeing Elodie really testing out how she wants to live and trying to choose and kind of hitting up against boundaries. Was that sense of having a kind of female protagonist with agency, was that something that was strong for you?
Yeah, I think so. And I guess the funny thing is because the dual narratives of Cursed Bread, I feel, she has agency in the kind of the first narrative, but she doesn't know what it's for. She has all these feelings, and it's not really the sense of, knowing where to place them. And then maybe in sort of the second narrative, which takes place after the event of the poisoning, she has this kind of agency, or she has more power over it. She's kind of, been placed in a life where, even though it's not, it's kind of not been the outcome that she would have necessarily expected for her life, she has a kind of freedom, and she has, more grasp on what to do. And the idea of longing, she's longing for love and for intimacy, but there's also a longing to be a different kind of person, a longing, or even not to be a different kind of person, but to be, a truer version of herself, or to figure out that version of herself. And the intimacy in the end and the sex is just a kind of a way to get her closer to that sort of trying out of things. And I feel like in the second narrative, she's sort of figuring that out in a way that feels more, more real and more authentic than the kind of maybe the passion of the other timeline.
Yeah, but even still, your hair is like violets and stuff in the second narrative, in that sense that even while being her more authentic self, she's performing as somebody else as well.
Yeah. She's trying things on for size. I guess that kind of, that sense of the grip that something can leave on you, it's not so easy to shake off.
Yeah. So the Aeneans are an all-female community, and there's also really interesting all-female spaces in Cursed Bread with the women at the washing house, where they're doing all their washing together, and it's a kind of space of for both Rathglass, the convent, and the washing house. It's like a space of kind of, it's almost anarchic at times, where they get to kind of break the normal social rules and talk freely, and that sense of freedom. Was that an important kind of space for you to create in the novels? And it also it's not utopian either. These are not perfect places.
Yeah, and I think so. One of the reasons I think the Aeneans exist is because I wanted to write about power, and I'm really interested in who has power, who wants it. I always wonder, why would you want to be a politician or a president? I always think it's deeply insecure people who want to be, you're making up for something, I don't know what exactly, but even if you create spaces that are meant to be, and they're very self-sufficient, there are no real rules, there's a social contract for how they all subsist. And yet in those places, and this happens whether you're talking about, your football team, your book club, that one person in the WhatsApp group, there's always somebody who wants to be more in charge, even in places that are meant to be, very idealistic and very democratic and very egalitarian places. One person always wants to be a little bit more in charge. And I was interested in how the shift happens and what the impact, because there can be a kind of a domino effect when this destabilizing thing of one person going, I want to have more say than everybody else. And I was interested in writing about that. But yeah, making them kind of all female. It was important that they weren't Irish as well. They're from all, and also some of them are there because they're getting away from the world. Some of them are just like, I love the idea of living in a commune. I'm not escaping anything traumatic or terrible. I just would like to live this kind of, in this sort of utopia that's not a utopia, So.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful, I think. Yeah. And I love that idea, as you say, is they come from they've got really varied backgrounds, and so you've got this really interesting collection of personalities there as well. It's not just one type or a stereotype at all. Yeah, you do it beautifully. This is just a giant compliment.
Thank you.
To both of you. Sophie, how was that for you? For what does the all-female space do for your novel?
I was so happy when I found out about the existence of lavoirs in the first place, because I was like, when I was reading about rural France and, in the kind of the 20th century, and I was like, every town had a lavoir where only women would come and wash their clothes, and it was a really social experience, but it was also very, kind of all women. I guess I love the idea of this sort of almost transgressiveness within this very routine domestic thing, and the lavoirs itself are really beautiful as well. My partner went to Pont-Saint-Esprit, which is the town that suffered the poisoning, and sent back these gorgeous photographs, and I was like, wow, it's kind of grand and beautiful, and I hadn't sort of seen it in that much detail. And I think that place, the space where they can truly talk, they can gossip, and they can kind of be alone, especially in the context of the town, where quite often the characters are kind of defined by their husband's profession, and they have these very strict rules because it's kind of this rural France in the 50s. And yet it's also kind of functions, I think, as a useful way to think about class as well, because Violet comes to the town and, there's a sense of envy, but also a bit of contempt, and also kind of fear, because she's has a very different background to the others in the town, and she doesn't get down and get dirty and wash her sheets. She has people do her laundry for her, and it was something so sort of witchy about it, but also this ordinariness of it.
Yeah. Absolutely, and you just mentioned there that it's obviously set in the early 1950s, so that's an also kind of background narrative running throughout, the sense of this is post-war, right? And so we've got that sense of reconnection again with the ordinariness of life, that we're now not living in a crisis, we're living in a kind of ordinary moment, and the joy of that. I was really struck by them talking, especially, and I want to come back to food, but just talking about food as something that they have again.
Yeah, I think that sense of the world kind of returning to a normal rhythm, or making attempts for it after this massive event, and it must have felt so strange still at that time, and that strangeness is something I really wanted to think about, and really zooming in, like I said, to the details of the food and the textures. And I mean, it was not a coincidence I wrote it during lockdown as well, looking back at it, I'm like, that is such a lockdown novel. That sense of just the strangeness of everything, how everything can completely change, and on the surface everything is fine and calm, but you are so close to everything being turned upside down at any point. And this focus on these textural details. I love texture.
Okay, well, I've mentioned food. Let me do it now, right? And there's something about writing in lockdown about another food culture, about the French food culture, and obviously America is kind of there in the shadowy background as well, in terms of how it bakes bread differently, i.e. bread in America is terrible, right? Can we all just agree that? Bread is so central, obviously, it's set in a bakery a lot of the time, to the book, but it strikes me that it's not just the making of the bread, which is its own process and ritual of creation, but also eating. And just from when you read, you were talking about spying on Violet, and she opens the packet as if she might tear a piece of bread off. Just that amazing thing of how you focus in on food as something that we put into our bodies. That it's an extension of the erotic, right, in the novel. And I'd love to hear you talk a bit about, whether it was always going to be set in a bakery. Was it always going to be about bread and food? Was it always going to be, were you interested in the food culture in particular?
Yeah, for sure. So the actual title of the poisoning was Le Pain, the case of Le Pain Maudit. So the cursed bread, the title literally wrote itself. And there have been a lot of theories. The generally accepted one is that there was contamination in the bread. And while I was researching the novel, I was sent down, I was obviously kind of drawn to French food culture anyway, and I love bread, and it's such an integral part of each meal. But then I was drawn down this wormhole of reading more about how integral actually bread is in France, and how it's such a massive part of history and culture, and how actually maybe the poisoning happened because there were actually very standardized procedures in place to have flour for the bakeries, so you couldn't kind of compete with other bakeries. You were given your flour by the state, and so people would experiment with the flour to make it to make their loaves better and stuff. There was so much stuff that I didn't know about, and going beyond it as a foodstuff, and to be this is a really, really integral part of culture, and something that there's so much around it.
It's amazing. I mean, did you eat? I have to say, it made me want to eat bread, and it made me want to eat that kind of crusty French bread as well. That's kind of hot. Did you eat a lot of bread?
When I was writing it in lockdown, I didn't actually have an oven that was functioning at the time, so I made it through lockdown on a hot plate, and so I didn't actually eat much French bread. I think sometimes I was going to the local bakery to get a treat loaf when that was available. So maybe that's why there's so much focus on the bread, because I was just thinking about all the food I really wanted to eat, and I couldn't get hold of it.
So this is where the longing comes from, right? It's we want bread, absolutely, that's amazing. One of the things also that comes through, and you've both mentioned it as well, is that we've got characters coming in from outside. And Nell is not from the island, versus Cleary, who's very rooted on the island. The Aeneans are from outside of the island. Yeah. Violet and Elodie are actually both from outside of the village that we're in. Sinead, what's the role of the outsider for you? Is it kind of a gift to a writer?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's an old standard plot. A stranger arrives. Somebody comes along, and there's another man in the book that Nell gets involved with, who's a very famous American actor who is kind of starting to hit the sort of. He's definitely at the dad roles and not far off the granddad sort of roles. He's in his sort of 50s, and he sort of arrives, and they have this sort of affair, but also she thinks he sort of arrives, and there's an assumption that he's there because he's overworked, and he's wants to, and he's literally off the ferry, and he's going around in an Aran jumper and a flat cap 5 minutes later, and the testing out his brogue and stuff. But he becomes a part of the story again that I didn't really realise that sometimes you don't know at the time, and then he becomes. Nell gets involved with him, and she thinks she knows everything about everybody, and that she's always the one who's powerful and in control. And there's a sense that in this situation she isn't necessarily with him. So he kind of represented that for me. But but the fact that lots of the women came from different places was sort of, and one person's idyll is another person's hellhole. So it doesn't always work. There's lots of people. The idea of being on an island is I'm like, well, we wouldn't want to go and live on an island and be an artist and be creative, and other people would be like, that's horrendous, there's no Tesco, I don't want to go there,
And then there's a stormy day and you're cut off for a long time.
Yeah, literally. I mean, I remember I did a retreat on the Aran Islands, and I just got back, and the power went out for 4 days. And they all have chest freezers within and a couple of people have generators. The pub's a generator, but people were just chucking things out. And then I remember there was an article in the Connacht Tribune, which was it was an American submarine. There was all these conspiracy theories about what knocked out the cable and stuff. But it's funny, I did an event yesterday with another writer who lives on the Aran Islands, Molly Hennigan, who's a great writer. And she was saying that in lockdown, the shop was closed, but the guy who owns the shop set up an island WhatsApp group for people to kind of order stuff, especially people who were, really isolating and people. So that's the sense of community. And that's the thing about islands, and this is what this book is. It's a fictional island because it's a 12-hour ferry ride, but there's a sense of community. Everybody looks out for everybody else, but there's also everybody knows what time you left the pub, or did you get the early ferry or the late ferry, or everybody knows everything about you. So you have to be able to withstand that. If that's not for you, you're not going to make a good islander. But she's been there for 9 years, and she said they don't talk to you for the first 2 years. They literally don't, because they think you're not going to stick it. So we're not going to put in the time. So she said, but it's all good now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I think just that sense of her always being able to, like she's trying to decide whether she really does belong or not, whether she's going to stay. I'm not spoiling any plots, but just that sense of her trying to make up her mind about whether she still wants to be an outsider or whether she wants to be an insider.
Yeah, and so the work that she makes, the book opens with her making this giant piece of land art, like literally with a kind of piece of driftwood. She's kind of carving, and there's a section at the back of the book where all the art that she makes is fictional, but it's influenced by lots of land artists and performance artists, and I talk about them at the end of the book. And she, at one point, she just says, what if I didn't live here, would I even be an artist anymore, or would I make the same kind of work? And I think that's her big fear, that she has this umbilical connection to this place, and it's very much associated with who she is as an artist. So she leaves, maybe she won't make that kind of work anymore, or maybe she won't make that kind of scale. And that work is also, if you've seen people who've made work out of, it's often ecological or environmental, but it's not the kind of thing you can stick a red sticker in a gallery. So it's not work you can sell. But she likes the impermanence of it. She likes that it's not going to be around forever, but it's also very hard to make that kind of work financially viable to survive. So it's the worst kind of art for her to be making in a way, because she's already on an island. There aren't many jobs. There's not a lot of this. So it's very, her existence is very, very precarious, as it is on any kind of islands or remote places. So I think the pull is, if I leave, that could be the end of my artistic career. So she's very conflicted.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the idea of the contingency as well as the precarity, of the lives that we're choosing. Sophie, for you, I was really struck as I was reading Curse Bread that I assumed that Violet and the Ambassador are the outsiders, and then I realised, Elodie our narrator comes from somewhere else too, that she is also brought in and has that. Like Sinead said, I think her mother-in-law doesn't speak to her for the first year or something. She has a really hard time integrating in lots of ways. And what made you want her to be an outsider too?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it was maybe an unconscious thing, but it felt sort of, true to my experience maybe of a rural environment, and also the sense, highlighting her difference as a person who had kind of assumed she might have a different life, and she meets her husband in the city. She feels more of this, attuning with Violet and the life that Violet has had. But I think these, the two kind of different kinds of outsiderdom, because I don't think, is that even a word? But, I don't think Violet and the Ambassador really saw her as an outsider, because you're just one of the town, maybe more of the kind of more susceptible people who, be open to kind of being manipulated a bit more than others. But there was almost these levels of feeling internet and not, and there was the sense in the novel where Elodie comes from a different place and then marries one of the village boys who's been there forever, and that sense of, I don't know, almost territorial sense. That was kind of interesting for me to explore those dynamics, and I guess it kind of lends itself to her vulnerability as well, that she is always never feeling quite at home, but she's not at home anywhere. She's always she's quite ruthless in that way, even though she's trying hard to, be in one place, but always dreaming of somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that idea of vulnerability, right? It comes through because she, in some ways, she's trying to perform a kind of power, throughout it, or grasp onto it, but there's always that vulnerability always running through it as well. Sinead, you made reference now to this amazing kind of appendix at the back, where you talk about the artists that inspired your work. Maggie Hambling, Dorothy Cross, Louise Bourgeois. These are the names of greats. And it's hard, right, to write, to transmute something that is visual or or performative or ephemeral, into prose. And so I'd love to hear a bit about your process in terms of just how you bring the art into the writing.
Well, I'm not an artist, but I have collaborated with artists and seen, how they do. And I mean, all my life, since I was a teenager, the first thing I do when I go anywhere is find out where the nearest gallery is and go and look at art. It's always been something. So maybe I'm a sort of writer trapped in an artist's body or something, or vice versa. But I love it. And again, the whole writing about music is like dancing about architecture. It's really difficult to sort of do that. But I think I'm a very visual writer, and that rather than sort of feeling my way into something, I can see it,
image.
And it's very sort of the senses. Like I could always smell the island, I could always feel it, I could feel the weather, and people are like, oh, I nearly have to wash the salt after myself after reading this book. So I think I just try to visualize. So I literally imagine what if I was Nell, how would I make that work, and sort of try to make it sound as authentic as possible. And it was important that I didn't want her to be specifically like somebody else. So she makes an awful, she makes work in sound projects, and she wants to make this lighthouse piece where she's going to project herself out onto the waves. She's making all the sort of concentric circles and maps on the ground. So I kind of wanted her to be somebody who makes the kind of work she wants to make. And it's like, it's loads of her precarious. It's very hard to be. I mean, in Ireland, and I have these conversations when I go outside of Ireland, that there's a lot of structural support here for people who are creative. It's still often not enough, and you have to be very driven to want to be a writer or to be a visual artist, particularly visual art, I think. And in Nell's case, it's the only thing that she wants to do. But my husband is a composer, and he does music. He's always made music, and he produced music, and he does music for film and television. And he said to me before, if I released an album again and no one bought it or listened to it or streamed it, or no one ever wanted to commission me again, he said, I'd still make music. And I feel that way about writing, and I think any visual artist I know, and I think it's even harder to make a living as a visual artist, you're not doing it for fame, and you're not doing it for money, you're doing it because it's an integral part of who you are, and you can't imagine doing anything else. I mean, things don't feel right to me if I get away from writing too much, and I think that's very much bound up in Nell's identity. But yeah, I hope the art kind of feels real, but also it's just my way of write about things that you like. I love art, so you get to write about things that you like,
Yeah, I often think that when I'm talking to students, they have an anxiety about the right way of doing things and how should I do this and what are the rules, and I'm like, actually, we're kind of making it up as we go along most of the time.
For sure.
And the rule is, do you like it? Are you interested? Because you're going to spend a lot of your time in this space, so you may as well be doing something that you're passionate about. Yeah. One of the things that really strikes me about how you write about art, and you do the same in Constellations in your nonfiction as well, you write about what might be labelled quite avant-garde art, but it feels very not avant-garde in the sense because it feels like it comes out of an authentic place, and the way you're describing it, and again, the same with that sense of, in Sophie, and your novels are so sensory, I remember The Water Cure, and just that sense of not even distinct characters, but being pulled into this whole world, right? This world of sensory immersion. And I think you both just do a kind of fantastic job about that. So I'm building up to asking a question about process, and I'm turning to you because in a moment then we will open the floor for audience questions. And I always find that it's good to give you advance warning of this so that you can be preparing your questions in your mind as I turn back to the writers and ask them my question. So this is a process question about how you write, where you write, when you write. So Sinead, you were doing a great job of talking about how difficult it is to find the time and the quiet and the sustained attention to write. Yeah. So how is writing for you?
I think there are more bad days than good days with writing, and I think it was easy to write a book. Everybody be writing books because it's a very solitary graft. It's a lot of days you're just. I mean, the days where your word count's lower than when you started, or they're like, oh God. But I don't have a room of my own. I did, but that's my son's room now. So I write at the kitchen table. So I kind of like that. I don't have to. I have to have my certain space and my lucky totems and my special desk and all that. I don't have that. I have to clear everything off and make the dinner at the end of the day. So I kind of like the realism of that, the reminder that, hurry up, you need to get out of here by 5:30 or 6. I find it's hard when you're doing public-facing stuff to try and quieten your brain to go back to it. But over the years, I've interviewed hundreds of writers, and no two people ever say the same thing about process. Some people are only nighttime, only morning. For me, I found, with Constellations, I was just very busy and had a lot of family commitments, and the only time I could really do it was the morning. So I'd get up at 5 and try and write, and I don't think I could do that now, but I'm never going to write this book if I don't. And I think Kevin Barry says that as well. There's a seam of gold kind of between when you've slept all night and you're not fully in the words, you haven't looked at your email or turned on the computer, and you're still there's a lucidity there that you're still a bit hazy. And I always found that for me, it's kind of like, I do not go to the gym, it fills me with horror, but I think that idea that it's writing sort of the same, if you get it out of the way early in the day, then you've done it and you don't have to think about it.
Oh, and you're golden.
There's no better
feeling.
So I just think I feel I can't work at night. I'm just too tired. My brain is not working. But I feel in the morning, if you do it, and there is an energy, and if you try and show up and do it at the same time every day. So I try and do it in the morning. I can't really write all day. I never really have that time to do that. But I think there's a certain point where you're diminishing returns. I don't know how much you have to do. But even like you can get, and I know people who talk to me about wanting to write, I don't have the time. It's like you can get an awful lot done in half
25
an hour.
minutes,
I know people who've sat outside the school, typing notes into their phone, or when you've got half an hour, like instead of scrolling at your phone, put your phone away and just get a notebook out. But it's all incremental. It builds up. It doesn't feel like it for a good while when you're starting on a book, but eventually it does. So there are no rules. Like you don't have to write every day. It doesn't have to be 1,000 words. It's just grab what you can and do what you can. You know? And it will eventually all start to accumulate.
Yeah, I find that very enabling, and I like morning writing as well. I came across this phrase a few years ago: "Pay yourself first." This idea that if you put yourself last on your to-do list, if you put the thing that you really want to do last, and you never get to it.
Just the if you get 75,000 emails a day, or people looking for things from you, or somebody wants a lift somewhere, or whatever. It's just if you've got it done, then you're not kind of panicking. Oh, I haven't done it yet. I'm not going to get to it. I'm too tired now. So if it's done, then it's done. So I just think the morning is the time for me.
Don't check your email.
Get off the internet. It's terrible.
How is that for you? How do you steer clear of distractions, Sophie?
I'm also a morning writer generally, and I think part of that is actually, the magic of the early morning, but also not having anyone else online or awake. Yeah. And also just I love that time of day, and I know it's not for everyone, but beyond in the evening, I'm not very good at writing either, and I think there's just something kind of magical about that kind of sense of aloneness, that quiet time. I think I'm very much more motivated by treats than by punishing myself. And I kind of just, I don't know.
Some words and you get some cake.
It's like, are you treat brain or punish brain? Figuring out how you work in that way. And I kind of have now conditioned myself to be 6 a.m. with a little coffee and everyone else is asleep. Or this is my special little time. Yeah, fancy bread, a pastry. I remember when I was writing. Maybe it was Blue Ticket. I was working afternoons in an office, and so I would kind of write at a coffee shop near the office that maximise the time, and then I would have a really nice pastry, and then go into the office. Or there was always some kind of motivation, but sometimes just the time is motivation as well, or the quiet and the sense of, like you said, paying yourself first, doing something for yourself. And I know when I was writing The Water Cure, and I would write before work, and I'd go into work and just feel so happy all day, kind of a bit yes, sorry to my job, but I gave the best part of myself to myself this morning. And just feeling having that within me felt good as well.
Yeah, I love that idea. Yeah, give the best part of ourselves to the page. Okay, I'm gonna open this now for questions. So does anybody have a question or something? Yes, great. There's a microphone, brilliant.
Right, can you? Oh yeah, you can hear me. I just wanted to start with something that Sinead said, but it's really a question for both of you. A couple of times, Sinead, you said that you plan one thing and then your brain takes you in another direction.
Sadly.
I just wondered whether you ever had that sense that it's the characters that you created are taking you in a different direction rather than something in the deep recesses of your mind. Yeah,
so sometimes absolutely. And again, I think I started this book about 12 years ago, version of it anyway, and so many times I thought I'm never ever going to finish this. I just don't think I can do it. And the reason I finished it was because I wanted to know what was going to happen to Nell. I was kind of obsessed, where is she going to end up? And I remember years ago I interviewed John Irving, and he said that he can't start a novel till he knows what the last line of the novel is, which absolutely horrified me, because I don't think I like the mystery. I like writing into the dark. I like not knowing. I don't outline or do any of those things. I know that's helpful for some people, but if I knew the end, my curiosity would be sated, and I wouldn't really the journey wouldn't be so fun. So yeah, I think your characters definitely can show up and bring you in a certain way. And I think you have to be able to go with that. Like I really didn't. I was like, oh God, these Indians, go away. But I knew that I had to kind of do it. And I think there's a lot of, you're writing in the dark a lot of the time, but you have to trust your instinct a lot of the time. I think, and you can also, that's why you renumber your drafts, so you can breadcrumb back. And if you go down this road and go, God, this is awful, you can just kind of go back and see what else you can kind of do. But yeah, characters do this. Before I ever wrote fiction, I remember you'd listen to writers going, oh, a character tapped me on the shoulder, and I'd be like rolling my eyes. And now I totally get it. I understand that now, that they do feel. And like, I still, this sounds strange, but I still think about Nell and wonder how she's getting on. Like, she does feel very real to me in a way. And I can't believe I just said that, but that's how I do feel about her, So I don't know if you feel like that.
Yeah, I think so. I think I really believe in tangents as well. Like, I feel like if a character wants to go somewhere that I wasn't necessarily expecting, I'm very much like, maybe it's more like, I'm like, oh, my subconscious wants to do this, but speaking like through the character, and they do feel really real to me. And so I'm usually like, I'm just going to let you do your thing. And then sometimes I'm like, that was exactly what needed to happen, but I couldn't kind of see it myself. So it's funny how it kind of works like that. It's just, it feels... I guess at that point when the characters just feel so real to you is like one of the real joys to me of writing, that sense of just being really carried along by something and almost like you've created something which is outside of yourself and just kind of seeing where it's going to go. But yeah, the idea of knowing your last sentence is terrifying to me.
I couldn't believe it. Yeah.
I'm like, it's very much up for debate until I write that last sentence, until I get to it.
I recently heard Colm Tóibín say that he can't start writing until he knows the first sentence, and that scared the daisies out of me as well. So, exactly.
And you don't have to write the first sentence first. That's you can come back to it later. You can write your killer opening paragraph when you finish the book.
Delete the first page is kind of my rule.
Yeah, for sure.
Other questions? That was great. Yes.
Hi, thanks guys, this has been really, really interesting. But maybe a related question then, how do you know when you're done? How do you know when you've got that last sentence? Or like you say, you still think back to Nell now and what's she up to now as such?
I think you're done when you can't bear it anymore. Honestly, I'm not being funny when I say that. When you're just like, I can't look at this book ever again. That's the feeling. I was talking to another writer earlier, and they reckon they're going to be finished in 2 weeks. And I said, how do you know? And he said, because I will not be able to look at it in 2 weeks' time. So I do. Yeah, you do kind of. There's a sense where you just, and that's when you need to. Like I didn't. For this book, I didn't show anybody as I was writing it, but I might do that the next time, but nobody else's eyeballs was on it, and I think there is a point where you're like, someone else needs to look at this, it's not me. You're too close to it. And then loads of writers will tell you about the drawer. You finish it, and then you put it away, and it's so useful because you take it back out and you just go, oh Jesus, and you see all the things that are wrong, and the sentences that shouldn't be there, or where things aren't connecting up. So just that's you need space from your own work. So if you think if you get to the point where it's like, totally done, and then put it away and you come back to it then, I think.
Yeah, I had this experience in the summer because I was working on a new book, and I printed off a draft of a fairly draft 4, draft 5. I was pretty much done, and I was like, I'm going to print it off, and I'm like, it definitely needs another draft, but I'm going to take it away with me. I'm going to leave it for a couple of weeks, and I'm going to go back to it, and it's probably going to be fairly light. I think it's in really good shape, and then cut to 6 weeks later, and that draft is just scribbled out completely. And I'm like, how could I have thought that draft was in good shape? It's in terrible shape. But I'm like, but there's a much better draft now. Yeah. And then, my partner, who's not a writer, was like, but what if you do the same to this draft? And I was like, please don't. This is just I think it's in better shape now. But it was so interesting being like, how many times actually can you go back to something? And in the end, it's like, you just have to be like, I'm done. And like you said, I'm sick of it. I know it. By this point, I feel like every book I've written, I knew at one point every single word so intimately. I'd really fought for that word over and over through draft and draft. And beyond that point, I'm like, there's just nothing more to do.
Yeah, there's a question just there.
Is it on? Yeah. This is to both of you. I wondered how open you were to editors' comments. So you talked about that when you edit and you look at the draft and you slash through it. If your editor comes back and says, oh, this needs to go, or I don't understand this, are you offended by that? Are you open to the comments? Are you very precious, this is how it has to be, I don't want to change anything? What your relationships are with your editors? Do you love them or loathe them?
I think it's a
Or
gift.
both,
It's
yeah.
a gift, I think, to be edited. I think I mean, we were just talking about this when you send your book to your editor for the first time and then you wait and it's like, oh God, I want to die while you're waiting to hear what they think. So you kind of work in like track changes in Word, there'll be like comments and stuff. And often it's just to explain things or somebody noticing, or they'll say, you used this word 37 times and you don't see it at all. But it's more, so you do, it's different. So you'll get like a structural edit, which is like, where is the story not working, or you need to get to this point bigger, or you have to bring that person in earlier. And then the last one will be kind of a line edit where they're literally looking at every single line to tell you where it's not working. But I've always found it, like they're not there to do a hit job on you, editors, they're there to help you and make the work better. And most of the time, I think maybe there was one thing I had that I always remember editor going like, why are there 2 bedrooms and not 3 in Nell's Cottage? I was like, does that matter? But little things like that you don't notice. It's more if you have a big thing where they're just like, this whole character isn't working, or these 5 chapters, or that's when it's really alarming. But I didn't really get that, and most of the time, I don't know if you agree, they're pointing out things that you kind of already know, and you know you meant to fix it, but you kind of chickened out and didn't do it, and now they're calling you out on it. So that's been most of my experience. It's like, oh God, she's right. But yeah, it's really helpful. It makes the work better, and it's a great kind of process. Time consuming, but it can be great. But yeah, thankfully, and they don't just go, this is rubbish. They're always a lot kinder than that. But it's mainly they're making sure it all, like, why did that happen there when that could have happened on page 80 instead of page 40, stuff like that. Stuff that you just don't see when you're so in it yourself. You're too close to it sometimes, and that's why editors are invaluable.
Yeah, I agree with that, often kind of agreeing. There's things I'm like, I really kind of hoped you would notice that, or maybe hoped it was like, it kind of was a bit more watertight than it is, but like, no, it's not. But yeah, I'm really lucky I have a really great editor, and we've worked together on all my books, and it feels like a collaborative process to me, and it's one that is such a huge privilege, I think, to like have her eyes on it, and to, I guess, get a new perspective as well. And I kind of really enjoy the editing process, especially even if we're like disagreeing on some things, because I feel like if we're disagreeing, I really need to make my case for what I want to keep or what decision I want to make, and then I'm like, wow, I'm going deeper into the work, like I'm actually understanding my own stuff more. And if I have a really good case, she's like, okay, good. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And so it feels like, kind of like almost like debating or something in a fun way. And you kind of understand, I guess, why you've written something, or the way you've written something more deeply yourself. I always remember as well, like I work quite, my agent's quite editorial as well, which is also a beautiful process. And I remember her sending me an essay once, I think when I was working on my first novel, and I was so tired of edits, and she was like, I think we need another round, like do another draft. And I was like, I can't, please, like just take it away from me, like I can't do another draft. And she just sent me this essay, and I can't remember who it was by, but the gist of it was talking about the editing process is such a privilege, like the only place in your life you get the chance to truly, truly say what you're trying to say in the most perfect way to you. Like you get so many opportunities to do it, there's no like limit to the editorial changes you can make. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, I'm actually so lucky. I'm going to do that draft, and probably like another draft. So that kind of changed my perspective in that sense as well.
That was a very effective message, right? Yeah. Read this essay.
Yeah, quite sly. She's like, maybe this will be of use.
Yeah. Am I missing any questions? Yeah, there's a question at the back.
How do you like? Oh, sorry. How do you like find the inspiration for your books? Is it just like from different books, or is it just like, say, like anything random?
Sorry, say that again?
How do you find your inspiration?
Ideas are everywhere. They really are. I mean, I remember like doing workshops, and I'd send people to walk around the block and come back and say, write about something that you saw or you smelled or you encountered. They're literally everywhere. But the problem is it's really easy to start things, and it's really easy to get ideas. It's the finishing is the hard part. And often it's a question of, I always find, even with the essays, that maybe you do this as well, but I tend to write my way in and have a look around and see what I want to do. Sometimes I don't think you sit down necessarily and go, this is going to be a book about A or B or C, because books will tell you what they're about, as will essays. So sometimes, And there's sometimes things you really want to write about and it doesn't click or it doesn't work or you can't kind of grasp it, so you decide on something else. But I think ideas are the problem is too many, and then but also figuring out which is the one that will actually make it into, which will be an essay, which will be a book, because there's loads of interesting things, but not all of them will sustain you for 300 pages. So it's, and again, it comes back to what I was saying. If you're interested in things you write about, it won't feel so much like work. I mean, it is labour, but if you're interested in, you know, art and islands, these are all kind of things that are my obsessions. So it felt kind of joyful, and I'd like to go into the desk most of the time. But yeah, I think it's, I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I always have like a list of stuff on my phone, like basically a notes app full of just like fragments or things I've overheard, or even like, to be very cheesy, like dreams or like images. Like I really like I totally agree, like inspiration for stuff is just everywhere. And I'm always kind of, if teaching, I'm kind of setting a lot of prompts, and sometimes people are like, why are we doing so many prompts? Because I'm like, because you have to almost like trick your brain into sometimes getting like, turning these ideas into something. And if you just like sort of think about an image or something for a while, it's really surprising like what can come up, and it's surprising what's kind of already there. And yeah, like Coast Bread came from a story. The book I've been working on this summer came from like literally a quote in a book that I read, and I was like, oh, and then you can kind of spiral up from there. And it's just, I think that sense of being like awake and alive to just whatever ideas are around. And if you keep returning to an idea, for me, like I think that's why it took me so long to write Coast Bread, because I had to sort of circle it for a while and be like, okay, well, I keep like thinking about it, so obviously there's something there. But yeah, like starting, finishing is tricky for sure. There's so many things to write about.
I think that's a really great place to actually finish, on the kind of abundance that you encounter, right, as writers and as creative people in the world, and also the abundance that you manage to translate into both of your novels is just fantastic. I'm going to hold up the covers again so that you can recognize them when you see them in the bookshop. They're also for sale down at the Stella Maris Centre. But I just want to finish by thanking both writers, both Sophie and Sinead, for their incredible generosity in talking about their work and in sharing their process with us today. Thank you so much.